was almost very kind of almost paranormal. You know how dogs kind of sense energies and things like that. Well, my dog kind of found Jimmy, and Jimmy brought my dog back to me, who's a husky nonetheless. So, you know, he's kind of, I was telling Amy, he's kind of like got that, he's just a little more wolf than the other dogs. And, you know, it's interesting that he brought me, Amy and Jimmy, into my life. And they're really great people. I'm not as privileged as them to be able to have actually seen or captured anything on image. But I am one of those people that feels these energies, and it's something as profound as I've traveled the world. It started to influence me a little more. I was definitely a skeptic of most everything. I think I'm a very scientific person until science starts running out of explanations for things. And then I start to be a skeptic, and you know, and it's hard to move me from that position. You might have seen I brought my Guy Fawkes mask. That is in honor of England and Jimmy and Amy. And you know, a lot of people know us now as V for Vendetta, so I just want to get that out there in the open. This is Guy Fawkes, and if you like conspiracies as well as ghosts and things like that, he might be somebody you want to Google and look up. The November 5th, and you know, in V for Vendetta, it kind of goes over the story, but it was actually based on a real story. I'm Michael Lundquist. I've opened for Vital Transport is my company, but Forsyth Voyagers is actually a travel club that I started. Based in Winston-Salem. Basically my mission is to promote global group travel to the community. It's an effort to raise overall spirits, intellect, and awareness. Basically what's happened to me as I've traveled is just I've become more open to supernatural things, bizarre things, mysteries. I've learned about different histories, so much so that, you know, I can, you know, the Irish history of the United States is way different than the United States history of the United States, and likewise when you go to a place like Romania. So if you can, well, and with Forsyth Voyagers, I do have plans, if you can go back one second. Sorry about that, Jimmy.
Oh, sorry.
To expand to 2 other travel clubs. The Camel City Travelers is where I'm going to focus more on camping trips and things like that. And then Tight Knit Travels is something that people can do to organize family reunions. I've done a bit of that myself with my own family. And so know some really great places in the United States to do that. But then also we have the tree there. I'm very interested in exploring ancestry. I've tried to do it for myself, and you'd be surprised how difficult it becomes after you get past like your great-grandfather. Nobody remembers things, you know, people are lost, and then, you know, history changes over the years. So if we can go past my name this time. My travel resume kind of started each bullet point off with I've visited 21 countries in 49 states, and I feel like I've got around. If you go on the internet, there's people that have done everything in the world. I don't know if they're just independently wealthy, but I've done a lot of this through business travel, through you know, things that I've promoted for other people, and you know, some of it on my own. I started going to Japan when I was 17 with a friend, and then I was pretty much snake bit by then. Some of the best places I've been, though, you know, where I really started to, you know, think about, you know, energies and spirits and different things like that is when I was in Peru. Now everybody knows Machu Picchu, but I actually went to a place that's a little less known. It's called Sexy Woman. It sounds like sexy woman. You can Google Sexy Woman Peru on Google, and it'll bring up the actual site. So much so, because that's kind of how you have to phonetically spell it. But it was an old site. They think like Mithra or one of the sun gods. The blocks are exposed, so it's kind of like the Stonehenge thing, except for like you can see them all. And it's created this entire fortress where they just block on top of block. And I mean, I don't know how anybody lifted them, why they didn't cut them. You know, we use bricks for a reason, because, you know, it all lines up symmetrically, and we use mathematics. They didn't. It looked like somebody cut a bunch of, you know, rocks with lasers and then threw them together, and you can't even stick your credit card through them. I mean, there's no spaces, there's nothing to hold them together. So this place is where I really started feeling this weird energy. Another place was when I went to Israel. I went to the Wailing Wall there, and you know, you just feel like all this. And then I was like, wow, and this is probably why we see this on the news, and everybody's got an opinion, and there's all this art. I mean, there is some sort of energy there, and it goes beyond all the religions and everything from what I felt. I mean, it's just an important place, and there's a lot of legends, as everybody knows, but I won't bore you with the Israel stories. I've worked in the travel industry for about 18 years. I like to write travel articles and promote travel, probably on an annoying level on social media. And I know you have to actually be kind of annoying on social media to grab people's attention, so I intentionally do that. That's why I like Twitter better than Facebook. So if you want to look me up on Twitter, it's at MK Lundquist, and I tweet about travel, but also mysterious things, conspiracies, and things like that. And I left the corporate travel job and own my own home-based agency for almost 2 years now. So if you can forward the slide. I got the privilege to visit Romania in this September, and Romania is a place I didn't know a ton about, but I knew it was starting getting closer to my ancestry, which comes from Croatia, Serbia, the place they used to call Yugoslavia. And so Romania is an amazing melting pot of people. They actually speak a Romance language. Romanian is a Romance language, but it's influenced by Slavic words. They have Turkish in there, and one thing that was very apparent when we visited there is it's been conquered by about everybody, and there's all sorts of legends and wars and all these things that are very much real, but then evolve into these legends or spiritual stories and things. We did not, the whole state, I guess, is the size of the whole country is the size of the state of Oregon. And so we didn't get to see everything. I wanted to check it out to see, first of all, is Romania safe for Americans and things like that. I'd never been to Bucharest, but I'd read some great things about it. And I wanted to see Transylvania, and that's what led me here today to kind of talk about Dracula, the real story of Dracula and how it evolved into this legend, but also talk about Romania and my travels there, because there's some other it's a place that's kind of filled with legends and lore and misconceptions and communism and all sorts of tragedies and things. We visited Bucharest, Sinai, Bran, Brasov, and Cebu. Those are the main cities we visited. Of course, we hit little towns along the way, and our drive home, if you can see that picture right there, it's through the Carpathian Mountains there in Romania. And if anybody's seen Cold Mountain, they used a lot of those sites because it actually, we felt like we were in like the Midwest looking at the North Carolina mountains and in a lot of places. And once you get into the mountains, they actually use that to film a lot of the scenes for the Civil War. It's a little tough and expensive to shoot on the federal site, so they use Romania. If we can advance. Sites that we visited on the trip and the ones that I'm going to highlight here, they're the Arc de Triomphe. So there's my picture there of that. We had to, it's a pretty busy traffic circle, so I am lucky I got that shot even out the window there. But it was made in 1922. Bucharest is known as well, its second nickname is like the Little Paris, and this was to commemorate all their losses in the world wars. And it's very impressive, and it's actually kind of farther away from the downtown of the city. So you get out there by the Village Museum, which is a heritage park that we visited, and these palaces and things like that. And you can really, you can really see it. It's a lot bigger, and there's not a lot of Paris behind it. So not bigger than the actual Arc de Triomphe, but it feels a lot bigger when you see it. So if we can advance the slide. And there's not a lot to say about their Arc de Triomphe there, so I just kind of included it on that side. But the first site that we actually visited with a walking tour was the Village Museum. And the most impressive things about this this site is it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site because of this wooden church over here. Romania has about 5 wooden churches that are just dating back to the 1400s, and I kind of made these little people, their ghostly images there, but I didn't see any ghosts there. But you do feel like you are kind of time warped back into time. They have these thatched roofs. There's a painter there. There's like an artist colony out there. And I just went wild with photography there. I'm not a photographer like Jimmy is, or at least not yet. But I do like to take pictures. And this was a fun little walking tour in Bucharest. So got to know some of the ancient history there and how people actually lived in the 14th century there in Romania. Yes?
Is that a cross in a cemetery in the church there?
Yeah, and this is actually a cross that was on like a window, and so like I like to shoot a lot of shots, and you'll see out of windows to give you perspective of looking out and things like that. Yeah, because you can't actually go in any of the churches on the site, or we didn't go into any of the buildings because I think they were pretty unstable, and you know the roofs. I mean, it looks like if you took a lighter, I mean, the entire thing would just go. I mean, so, you know, it's amazing how they've kept this up and restored everything, but it's kind of like Old Salem, or, you know. So that was a good way to start the tour. And then we went to Primavera Palace, and, you know, this was Chichenko's, like, mansion, and he's a communist dictator. You can go look up all this stuff. I don't think I'm actually saying his name right, but that's the more common way that Americans have heard it. I've played it on the internet a million times, so I'm trying to get it right there, but like you, I have trouble with his name. And I only speak Spanish. So, but this was an opulent mansion, and what amazed me is that they didn't start doing tours, I think, until about 7 years ago. And I tried to do a little backstory on that. They might have tried to open it a little earlier than that, but now it's a regular thing. And if you can, if anybody knows what this is, it looks like a torture chamber for aliens, but it's actually their spa back in like the 1950s. This, they had all sorts of things. I took pictures of the different equipment, but this is kind of the most bizarre looking one. So I thought it was kind of creepy. This area right here, he's got frescoes all around, a swimming pool, a jungle inside. I mean, and this is where you're learning about a communist state, where they were having regular blackouts for the, you know, the citizens there, and meanwhile the people are living like this. Opulent bathroom. You can see the ghost of Michael Lundquist there in the mirror. Caught myself in the shot, and this was his chessboard, a lot nicer than mine, or the one that I played with my dad growing up. So it's a cool sight to see because it's really eerie, but also at the same time, you know, there's a lot of symbolism inside, and you get the feeling that a lot of these dictators and stuff might have known a little bit about the ancient knowledge. He's got a lot of Egyptian stuff, and I didn't have time to, you know, kind of analyze all these murals and things in there, but, you know, there's a lot of bizarre stuff, and, you know, if nothing else, he's collecting, you know, artifacts a lot like the Nazis and every other kind of, you know, powerful dictators were interested in, you know, artifacts, whether the lore is real or not on them. It seems like they always collect them for some reason. I don't know if your ego gets so big and that's just a natural thing that occurs or what, but we saw some interesting things in there. So, go ahead, next one for me, Jimmy. Pell's Castle. So, or they say Pell. I say it the American way. You know, Dad, did you get the right pronunciation on that? It's too bad my mother didn't make it here. She gets the right pronunciation, but we'll call it Pell's Castle. Or I like to refer to this as the more Disney-ish castle because they actually, I think the last noble people that lived there was, I mean, it was definitely in the 1900s. And, you know, we actually saw a photograph from, I think it was the 60s of a princess, and they used to have like poets and artists that came in. So there's actually a photograph of like one of the last princesses that lived in there. This is the first place to have a vacuum, any castle, and it's the only castle that has a vacuum, and it's a lot like the, you know, the one where you plug into the wall right there, and so they have vacuum, but the result of this going into the 19th century, 1900s, and beyond is that everything in the castle is just amazing, and that's why I call it more like Disney. It's your fantasy castle. The weapons rooms are all out of this world, and you can just tell that, you know, there's a little bit more of a modern influence, money spent on this castle. Beautiful. You actually have to pay a charge to take pictures inside, so I only had one person do that, and these are a couple of his images there, and I tried to put a few more on the internet and things, but, you know, he went crazy. I had about like 400 images or something like that, so I've got all of those. But it's really something you have to see for yourself. You're in there, and you know, it really does feel magical, a little hokey, but at the same time, you know, there's a real history behind it. A lot of misconceptions about Dracula and Vlad the Impaler with this castle because it is so beautiful and romantic. He's never, from what they find, never been on the grounds, never been anywhere, you know, really that close to this castle. So, but it's still a great sight to see, and he is related to some of the people that are in the castle, as I'll talk about a little bit later. Go ahead, next. In Bran, actually, this was after we saw Draculas Castle. We went to Sinai Monastery, and this is, you know, I asked the tour director, you know, the city is actually named for Mount Sinai, and has a history that goes back. But a lot of these monasteries and things, you look and go back to Vlad the Impaler's family. In fact, I'll touch on it a little bit later, but his grandfather, and himself, you know, were big-time defenders. So there's a lot of people that think, you know, they were very cruel, and you know, I'll get into some of that. But there's a lot of people, too, that see them as very much, you know, Christian defenders to the Ottoman and the Turkish invaders and the Saxon invaders. And there's lots of people that were, you know, coming into Romania, merging cultures, the Hungarians. I mean, it's hard for me to find, you know, a group that they weren't at odds with at some point, or, you know, choosing different sides and things like that. But what you can find in these monasteries are like the oldest frescoes and things, and they were letting me taking pictures of some of them. In the oldest monastery I went to, I wasn't able to, but I got these two images inside this monastery, and the grounds are just beautiful. As you can see, it's very peaceful and everything, but it's also, you know, it's very medieval and spooky. But it was the middle of the day, and there, you know, nobody's really telling haunted stories or anything like that. But, you know, if you look into one of these, I don't know that I want to be in some of these like older rooms that we went in at night or anything like that. Reminds me a little of the you know, haunted tour that I've been on in, you know, Charleston, South Carolina. I went to a haunted jail, and that was interesting. But, you know, I could definitely feel energy here. But just beautiful, beautiful frescoes. Oldest ones I've seen, and, you know, they let you take pictures. So this was a really nice visit. And then Bran Castle. So this kind of fast forward to Bram Stoker's novel about Dracula. He was, you know, very influenced by the legend and lore behind Vlad the Impaler. Now, Vlad the Impaler, you know, was, by all accounts in Germany and other places, you know, the stories just get crazier and crazier. But one thing they do tell you in Romania is that, you know, his nickname, the Impaler, is from the way he liked to treat his enemies. And those were also enemies within the state. You know, our tour director even mentioned if you were caught for stealing, even, you know, and it was a big public thing, you were impaled. So, you know, the punishment... He was very much respected by some people, as in Romania, when he was on your side, he was, you know, very just ruler and everything. But he made a lot of enemies too, and you know, a lot of these enemies were immigrating into the country, like the Saxons and people from Luxembourg, and you know, there's a lot of this lore is a combination of him being, you know, well, he did impale people with the stake, so that's true. But everything I can find from, you know, Bram Stoker and, you know, him writing Dracula, they say that it's, all they can find is it's a coincidence, the stake thing. Seems a little bit of an odd coincidence, and there's a lot of, you know, conspiracy around it. But, you know, he liked to impale people with a stake, and they said he would make it rounded too, to make it, you know, more painful for the victims and things like that. It's a little bit complicated, but, you know, they're related to all the nobles, and, you know, he was the first legitimate son of his father, who was only half legitimate. So, you know, the family trees get all splintered, and I was going to use the family tree that we saw in Bran Castle to show you guys, but then I went online and I found so many conflicting things. So I'm kind of just going to like touch on it and talk about it. But this was the cross that, if you walk up this staircase, is the entry into Bran Castle. This is the cross that sits right there. And our tour director told us, you know, on Halloween there's a line around, you know, the entire village. It's a very small village there. After we walked up this entire flight of stairs, one of the members of our group had to use the restroom. Thought it wasn't going to be a big deal, but the restroom was out of order, and, you know, this castle's from, you know, the 1400s, and, you know, there's only one. So then, you know, he had to walk all the way down the, you know, the hill and use the restroom at the shop there. Halfway through the, or no, I was probably 3/4 through the tour. It happened to me too, so I went and met him down there. Then, you know, this one was out of order. Then that bathroom went out of order. Then I went to another bathroom in the town, and it seemed like by the time everybody got down, all the bathrooms were out of order. So we had sort of like a ghostly bathroom curse in Bran Castle. But what you do find out is, you know, bathrooms are tough in Europe, but, you know, in a place like this, don't go eat a bunch of soup and drink 3 gallons of water like we did. But, you know, I got some of the best shots in here, and, you know, the way they restored it, all the hardwood floors in there, if you were wanting to sneak out or something like we did when we were, you know, younger, trying to get past your parents, you could, I mean, you could not breathe or lean in a certain direction without the floors creaking everywhere you went. And in fact, it was hard to hear, for me, even the tour guide, at some points when people would be walking by. So the whole castle creeps, and but there is kind of a little letdown, whereas, you know, a lot of Vlad the Impaler's family was in this castle. I guess, you know, Bram Stoker was a lot more inspired by Bran Castle than Vlad the Impaler, and so he actually, you know, the only record they really know is that he definitely hunted on these grounds, which, you know, back then, if he hunted, he probably stayed there. But, you know, there's a lot of mystery around Vlad the Impaler. They don't know where he's buried. They thought there was this whole lore, and you'll find on the internet a lot of people say he was beheaded and buried in this monastery. Well, they excavated there at the monastery, and they found just a bunch of horse bones, horse heads, horse skulls, no human bones in there at all. There's another monastery that I researched that they think that he might be buried in. It has not been verified. And then our tour director told us a little bit of lore about this island that he, you know, might be buried on in the middle of some lake somewhere in Romania. But, you know, I asked him, and, you know, to date they have not, you know, found even human bones at a grave that he's allegedly buried at. So that just kind of added to the mystery for me. So as we went along, I just was asking locals questions and things like that. And sorry, Jimmy, if you can. Bad timing. Sorry. And then this is a city called Cebu, and I didn't really do much research before I went, and we just did a walking tour. But this was actually one of the best cities I've been in Europe. Reminded me of Segovia, Spain. Everything is very historic. It takes a long time to get there from Bucharest. I mean, this is 2 days of traveling. From what we were made kind of aware by our driver and tour director is that there's probably 100 miles, I would say, of interstate type roads. Everything else we traveled on was kind of your 2-lane roads. In fact, there were shepherds, you know, bringing cattle and sheep and things like that, and we had to stop our car. And so, you know, it's a little bit tough to travel in the area, but once you get to this place, very, very awesome city. It's got a lot of hills, and you can see the roofs of the houses, which I obviously liked. Beautiful churches and things like that. And there's actually a famous art heist that was done here where they stole a bunch of really good paintings, and then they tried to duplicate the thing 30 years later and got caught when they did it the second time, and a couple of the guys confessed to it. But that was kind of interesting story. But there's not any haunting things from here, but when you leave here, you actually go on the Transylvanian Highway, and you go through this, you know, beautiful scenic road through the Carpathian Mountains, and that's where we did a stop, and it really got kind of interesting for me because it wasn't expected for me on the trip. So this is the Carpathian Mountains and the Alt River. This one I thought it was a pretty good shot. I got right out of the car. And then this one I took from the monastery that I'm about to tell you about on the next slide. But as you can see, this was a little bit more dramatic and reminded me of like the Canadian Rockies. But all the way up there, it was more like foothills. Reminded me a lot of North Carolina. And I'll probably forget to mention this, so I just want to tell you in case you're going there, they are not on the euro, and so everything was very, very affordable. I was able to get gifts for my children and beyond, and I only went to the ATM once. So I think Eastern Europe is a really good place to visit right now, not just Romania, but definitely know Romania is affordable. But if we go to the next slide, basically this is Vlad the Impaler, or Vlad Dracula, and this is the hunting grounds. I took a picture. They build houses and everything now, but this is where the tour director told me that the hunting grounds used to be. So that's the family crest, and a picture of Vlad the Impaler. Now this is a photograph of maybe another photograph of a reproduction or something like that. But they say that the original fresco was him, and you know, this is the most accurate depiction of him in his face. So I don't know where the actual painting was, but this was in Bran Castle where I got that photo. So if you go to the next slide. We stopped at Cozia Monastery and Mercia the Old, and I didn't really, know anything about this guy Mercia the Old or this monastery. And our tour director said, "Hey, we got some extra time. When we're going on this road, we're going to stop at this monastery." Well, in fact, Mercia the Old is the grandfather of Dracula and the father of Dracul, who is Dracula's father, which in Romanian his name means Satan, devil. I use Satan now, there wasn't that term back then, but devil, dragon is another interpretation of it. This is kind of where, if you're into conspiracies, they get like the dragon blood theory and stuff like that. And so he is actually buried in this monastery and has a little different of a reputation than his grandson. He was a, pretty good ruler. They both were, in power and removed from power and back in power. Him 2 times, and Dracula himself, Vlad the Impaler, however you want to say it, was in power 3 different times and removed from power. So they, there's something to it. They're always coming back, and they're always seeking revenge, and they're always seeking their power again. But he successfully defended the Romanian forces against Turkish invaders once again, and made some good alliances with Polish and Hungarian, and was really well respected because he opened some trading routes and things like that. And he's buried there in the monastery. They would not allow me to photograph anything inside of there because this is like basically national treasures for them. They have a fresco of him himself, and then a duplication basically of that Sinai fresco. I don't know if it's a duplication or if it's just the exact same one, but they seem to have that over and over again in Romania. And standing over his tomb and everything there, I mean, I just had the eerie sense of, and this monastery is, if you go back one for me, this monastery, if you walk around the back, or actually 2, sorry. It goes right here to that river, and it sits on that river, and there's all these hot springs and everything there, and we noticed all these Romanian tourists were there, and there's no more Americans or Japanese, taking the picture everywhere. It was Romanian tourists, and we were like, what is this place, and they said, this is like a place where people come to go heal, and I saw a lot of people at that monastery talking to monks and things like that. I don't speak Romanian, and I tried to get as much from my tour director as I could, but he basically said it's a very spiritual place and a place where people go to get healed when Western medicine and things like that aren't working for them. So that was really one of the coolest things I saw on the trip. And if we can go back to the monastery. And, so I took the sign. The one thing that I was really impressed with is 1386 is when they first broke ground on this thing. It was completed in 1388. I've been all over Europe, but I'm not used to touring things that are that old, in that good a shape, and that well preserved. So, there's something to it. And then, I was going to talk about their family tree a little bit, and I found some very interesting things on their family tree. I can, pass these things around to people, but I printed off one copy of the family tree, which kind of starts and shows you like where Count Dracula actually came from. But then I printed off another one that traces it all the way to Prince William, and so this is what a lot of people talk about if you talk about like conspiracy theories and things, but you know, they all had like illegitimate wives and illegitimate this, that, and the other. So I don't know if any of it, I mean, it'd take me a long time, and I think there's a lot of debate whether or not any of this is true or not true, but you know, there is some truth to it, at least, because you know, you find the same imagery in London. I have images of myself from the city of London, which is actually, you know, an unincorporated part of London, kind of like Vatican City or Washington, D.C. is. And you see a lot of the dragon imagery all of a sudden come up again. And, you know, if you go to the Tower of London and you see, you know, things in the castle, you see things like that. So, you know, I don't know how much of there is to it, but, you know, there definitely is some strange things, you know, about the royal family and things like that. So, you know, it's very possible that, you know, this dragon bloodline or this Dracula bloodline is, you know, something that, you know, some people know about, and, you know, it might be like an ancient, you know, secret. You know, Jimmy, I wanted you to kind of tell them the one story you told me about the Ohio man that was connected, or was it Pennsylvania man that was connected to Bram Stoker, and they...
Oh, that was a story that I found that was kind of odd. This man had known Bram Stoker when he had written Dracula, and evidently sometime after Stoker died, this man's family were playing in the barn in this farm in Pennsylvania, and the kids found this trunk, and they opened this trunk. It had like a bad rusty lock on it or something like that, so they forced it open. Inside was the body of many very dry, dead rats. Okay. That's weird. It gets weirder. Under the rats, in a, like, wrapped in cloth, was a manuscript. The manuscript of the book Dracula.
Oh boy.
That Bram Stoker sent to his friend in Pennsylvania, and that's how it ended up getting stored. I'm like, who stores a manuscript in a trunk full of dead rats?
Because it was a manuscript of Dracula.
And, you know, and you know, everything I read and everything they tell you says that he really had no knowledge of Vlad the Impaler, and I really never thought much of your story when I was over there until I heard that when they dug up his grave, they found animal bones. I mean, it wasn't rats, but it was horse bones that were buried there, and it, you know, it just seems like, you know, there's this mystique behind it. But he was actually a real person that existed, and so, you know, it reminds me of, you know, a lot of these tales are, you know, you're dead and you rise again, and you know, it goes to from Jesus to Mithra to, you know, Count Dracula, maybe even in a way, you know, maybe Bram Stoker, you know, kind of brought that tale back to life. His enemies also loved the story because they were trying to get his illegitimate brother placed in his enemies were the Saxons and some of the other enemies in the country were, and they, you know, like the fake news now, they loved the Dracula tales, and the worst tales you could tell about Vlad the Impaler and his family, the better at that point, and they were able to kind of, you know, push them out of power, or at least gain a little more independence for themselves where they weren't getting impaled, you know. On one occasion, Turkish captives were exterminated, 20,000 at once there in the capital city by Vlad the Impaler. So these are actual stories that led to stories like that he impaled people and then, you know, had them served as food to their family members and things like that. And, you know, all of these stories, I could only find factual accounts for the impalings in mass quantities, but all these stories are things that have been legend and living on in German lore pretty much as long as, you know, since the guy passed away. He definitely made an impact, definitely made some enemies, and also definitely had some friends. So it was really interesting, and it was a lot more than, you know, I actually expected behind the story, and there's still a lot of questions for me that's kept me interested. And when I went out to eat with Amy the other day, we started talking about Halloween, and that's kind of how we got the idea for this event. So if we can go on to the next.
Okay.
Thank you. I appreciate everybody coming out tonight. I didn't have a ton of haunted stories or anything like that, but I've been to places, and if you travel, like Amy and Jimmy will tell you, you start going to these ancient places and ancient cities and things like that, and ancient sites. There's an energy, there's a spirituality. I find a lot of connections between, haunted places and then, ancient sites and ancient wisdom and things that we don't understand. And you guys were talking about the ley lines. Well, I don't know if you know, but all the pyramids that they are finding are also on these same exact lines that these circles are. I had the same experience that Amy did at Stonehenge. Just blew me away. People don't realize that those are like icebergs, and the majority of the stones, some of them are under the. And when you're actually there looking at them, it's the same feeling that I had at Saxon Woman. It was that what is this, and why are there so many of these things, and why does everybody say if you're willing to say what is this, besides some conventional BS reason, to me, you're labeled some kind of conspiracy theorist or some kind of outcast or things like that. I just will tell you, there's definitely energy out there. The pyramids are definitely not 5,000 years old in Egypt, and if you look back into ancient history, you can learn about a lot about now, I think. So that's me. This is my website and my company, and I think some of you saw, have been on my Facebook group and things like that. But if you're not, we're on Facebook. You can look for Forsyth Voyagers, and I'm going to be collaborating with Amy and Jimmy more. I love art. I like to write, so. If you want to see my art, you're gonna have to sit down and read something. And so I can't present that, but. I just wanted to thank you guys for coming tonight. I know we've gone a little bit long, so I wanted to go through that a little bit faster. But thanks, everybody, for your support. And hopefully we'll be doing this again very soon. So
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.